This is a dangerous topic to preach on, and I was tested this morning in this very topic, and so be warned that you might too. I mean, the question really is this: why is patience so important? I just laugh like I'm going to get up and preach about patience because I got this so mastered, and the Lord reminded me this morning, I'm working on you too, and thankfully the Lord has surrounded me, and let me just say, us, really, as a church. I mean, we're just kind of a small family church, but this is a church that's filled with real, authentic people who are really seeking to love one another, and I'm so glad for that. So I don't know about you. By the way, let me see. I can see okay, I can see the clock there. My phone is currently being used as the hotspot, so I don't have my timer here, so I'm going to do my best. So, if you don't have plans for lunch, we may just go right on through lunch this morning. Just kidding. Now, I don't know about you, but patience just doesn't come naturally to me. Maybe to some of you, you're more just naturally patient, long-suffering people. But, I get patient with the people that I love and care most about, which are primarily my wife. I'm not always patient with her. I should be a lot more patient. She's more patient than me than I am with her. My kids, who God has just blessed me with, and they can attest. Don't say amen too loud back there, boys, but I don't always act as patiently as I should. We tend to get into some pretty dumb arguments over things that really just don't matter, right? That's just, at home, did you ever find that? Like, you just get into some really dumb arguments about just the dumbest thing. Because, well, we get impatient. We just get impatient with each other. It kind of starts with me. I think it starts with me. And as important as the virtue of patience is with people, whether those that we love and care most about, or a neighbor, or maybe a coworker of you, maybe God has put that coworker, maybe you have the one in mind, that coworker that requires, it's kind of the EGR person, or in this case, EPR. EGR would be extra grace required person. You know that person? But for this morning's message, we'll call it the EPR, the extra patience required person. You got that person in your life? You probably do. Don't nudge your neighbor, but that might be the first person. I know that's Laura's EPR, me. I'm the extra patience required person in our house most of the time. But more importantly, brothers and sisters, and to be honest, more difficult, is the importance of having patience with God. See, the fact is that God's timing is usually, almost always, not our timing. In fact, I wanted to get married. Back when I was in college and I was single, and I was really striving to be a godly person. I had my list of characteristics and different things that I wanted in a wife, and I had just gotten to this point where I was content, and God was just doing some really great things in my life, and I was just really content. And I mean, I thought years before God was going to bring that person, but it was finally I made a 2-year commitment in college. When I went to college, I was a little bit older, so I think I was 22. When I went for the second time, and I made a 2-year commitment to not date, and that was God's way. That was kind of my way of saying, okay, God, okay, I wanted this to be sooner, but okay, I'll wait, and God made me wait, a little bit longer. Now, one of my best friends, Samuel, who Laura and I, we just adore Brother Samuel. He was just such a close friend. He was in our wedding, and he's a missionary in South Korea. I hope maybe some of you did get to meet him. Some of you have been around for a little longer. He and his wife and his kids, they shared with us when we first started at Fields Road Elementary School. And I think Samuel was over 30. Maybe he was even in his mid-30s when he got married, and so he had to wait a lot longer. God's timing was different. Maybe you can relate in one way or another. We want things to change like yesterday, don't we? We want things to change yesterday, but God usually brings about change and answers our prayers and deals with us more slowly than we would like. But He's never late. God's never late. God's never in a hurry. You read the Gospels, you look at all that Jesus did, all the responsibilities that He had to prepare these disciples. Imagine the responsibility to prepare these 12 men, which ended up being 11, really, and preparing them for like the most significant responsibility ever, to be the foundation of the church. And he only had a couple of years to do that, but he never seemed to be in a hurry. In fact, it's just the opposite. He seemed to pull back and pull away in the wrong time. There's all this stuff going on, and Jesus would wisp himself away from the crowd to get less done at times. At times, he would stay very late. At times, he'd pull away. Very interesting. Never late, never in a hurry, always just on time. So in light of some of the great temptations in life, especially our relationship with wealth, as we talked about last week, we want to hold that in tension as we move to this passage, because I think James has that in mind. God calls the church, including us, to be patient. Everybody just, I'm going to do a wedding today. Did a wedding on Friday, and almost every time I ever do a wedding, I say this a lot. Just take a deep breath. Moments in life are really key, and some moments are more important. And did you know that actually more important than food, so the fuel, how important food is, right, to fuel your energy? Do you know that breathing is even more important? Just try to hold your breath for 10 minutes. It's more important, and actually, it has healing power. Did you know that? Deep breathing has healing power. There's some amazing things I'm learning. I'm on this just overall health kind of journey this year, and one of the things I'm learning is the importance of breathing. So let's just all take a deep breath. And maybe for the next 10 minutes, take several deep breaths, and just nothing magical. There's nothing weird here. Just take a few deep breaths so you can relax yourself and be in a place where you can actually listen to what God might want to say to you this morning. So with that in mind, remember James 5:7. James 5:7. Be patient then, brothers and sisters. Now remember, James often starts this way, kind of a new topic. So he's building on what he's just said. Remember, therefore, what's the therefore? He's building on what he just said. He's talking about this massive temptation of wealth that actually includes evil. Remember how we can get really mixed up with evil intentions. It's not evil in and of itself, but it's the root of many types of evil, right? And in light of that, he says, brothers and sisters, he's talking to the church very clearly here. Brothers and sisters, be patient until the Lord's coming. So just pause right there. And I want to encourage you. I don't know where everybody's coming from. I don't know most of you well enough to know what your eschatology is. Eschatology, just a theological word for, the end things, the way things are going to end. But I want to encourage you, if you have not been thinking about the Lord's coming recently, this morning's a good time to think about that. And it's a really life-changing theology. It's very important, not only to how we live every day, the decisions that we make, the priorities of our life. It's vitally important. And here James says, be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. And then he illustrates that in a way that most of us cannot relate to, but we'll try. He says, see how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. I think if he was talking to Washington, D.C. people like we are today, he might say, be patient like the calendar of congressional activity. Because, man, you got to wait for things to happen sometimes for a long time. That might be a little more relevant to us. I don't know how many of you grew up farming. I don't know anything about farming. I just know nothing about it. I don't know what it's like to be patient as a farmer. Did any of you grow up on a farm? Okay, so we're probably more in the illustration of congressional calendar. But we'll do our best. Now, the Greek word translated patient here, I would try to translate it for you, but it's like 15 letters long, and it doesn't matter anyway. But it describes, quote, self-restraint which does not hastily retaliate a wrong. And if you've been paying attention to just news, I think, over the last few years. One of the reasons why so many people don't want anything to do with the church has nothing to do with Jesus. It has nothing to do with God, and it has nothing to do with the Bible. Do you know why most people out there who aren't connected to a church don't want to have anything to do with a church? It's because the people in the church. And we might relate to that, right? Maybe you, at some time, you were part of a church where maybe you were even embarrassed by certain things. Maybe the pastor said, or maybe the way some position that Christians in the church held or spoke out a little loudly. Maybe it had to do with politics. Maybe it had to do with whatever. And I'm thankful that over the last couple of years, our board has been very careful to hold me accountable. And if and when I say things that maybe are not appropriate to unity, I've been called out on that, and I really appreciate that. And hopefully that's the kind of church we'll be, because we want to be careful. Politics doesn't unite us. Being American doesn't unite us. The color of our skin, ethnicity, culture, none of those things unite us. Those can't bring us together in any ultimate way, at least in terms of why we're gathered here, right? There's one thing that unifies the church of Jesus Christ, and that is Jesus Christ. And we want to try to work really hard here. And so here, James is saying, be patient. It takes self-restraint that does not hastily retaliate a wrong. And yet, I can't tell you how many Christians I've met with, even over these last 3 years, that talk about, they try to justify how a Christian should retaliate in certain situations. And James would say, I think, no, brothers and sisters, that's not right. James, as many other writers of Scripture, many others, and I'm going to bring you to some of them, ties patience to the second coming of Jesus. His return is near, therefore be patient under the circumstances that you're facing now. I have to tell you, brothers, I have to confess that for me, it's, for whatever reason, up until this point in my life, it hasn't been that difficult. All things considered, I have lived a good life. I've had relative health. I haven't lost very many people in my life to death in terms of family. I've had friends pass. I've had tragedy in my life, just like all of us to some degree. But I know people who, they are characterized by quote-unquote bad luck. Just their whole life seems to be one difficult thing after another. You probably know some people like that. So as I'm sharing this, I just want you to know I'm learning from, I think one of the things that God has been doing in my life from day one at Restoration Church is bringing people into my life to teach me how to love a little better, to teach me how to empathize a little bit more with the struggles of people. And I hope that you'll be part of that as well, that God will use the ministry at Restoration Church to help you empathize with people that maybe are in a different situation than you are. Commentator Burdick explains, quote, the word parousios, this is coming, so be patient until the coming of the Lord. This was a common term used to describe the visit of a king to a city or province of his kingdom, and thus depicts Christ as a royal personage. Brothers and sisters, the King Jesus is coming again. And that truth, it's not that he's just coming again, but he's coming soon relative to the circumstances that are happening in our lives. That doesn't minimize pain. It doesn't minimize loss. It doesn't minimize the circumstance that you are feeling today. But when we have a grander vision of what life is ultimately all about, then my circumstances shrink a little bit. And your circumstances might be a little bigger than mine, a little more painful, maybe less so, but in the grand scheme of things, it pales in comparison. Notice the illustration James gave. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for autumn and spring rains. I don't know about you, but I am already, it's been a pretty mild winter, I am ready for spring. I do not like winter anymore. My wife and I, we spent 5 winters and summers in upstate New York where it's snow and frozen from Thanksgiving until April. And I was like, man, I'm done with that. And moved down here. 10 years ago, man, I love Maryland weather. You get all 4 seasons. This is great. the fourth season anymore. Or whatever number winter is. Maybe, you get older and you're a little creakier and cold. I just don't like that. I'm not very patient for the next season. I'm ready for spring, and now I'm preparing to run a marathon, and I invested, I got a hat, I told my wife and my kids, there's going to be no excuse. I told Bruce, there's no excuse for me to go out and train. This week is going to be the coldest week coming up. Yesterday was great, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Say goodbye to 60. We got teens in the lows this next week, and I'm looking at the calendar, and I'm running Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And I mean, with very little exception, I do not want to change the days I'm running. I want to stick to it. Pray for me on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Now, I already asked if anyone grew up farming. Those who didn't, and that's most if not all of us, don't know the kind of patience that it takes to wait for rain. I mean, I can't wait for just a warm day to go run, let alone the next season. Now, the early rains came shortly after planting in Palestine in late October and early November. The late rains followed as the crops were maturing in late March or April. And James certainly knew that. He understood the agriculture in Palestine. And if he was here, he'd understand the calendar of the congressional calendar, or school or whatever. And he'd probably make a little bit more of a relevant illustration for us. But the point of the farming illustration seems to be that as Christians, we are primarily sowing and cultivating. Most of our life is very boring. Most of our life is, hey, good morning, neighbor. Hey, can I pray for you, neighbor? Hey, and you're praying and you're laboring and it's visiting and you're just praying for people, and then you're praying some more, and then you're saying hi, and you're trying to be friendly, and you're trying to help that person, and you're just present with people. Anybody watch This Is Us? And some are not willing to. Oh, there you go, yeah. My favorite show, man. Oh, I just love that show. I've told the story before, but I was introduced to that show several years ago. I used to go to a gym. I don't go to a gym anymore, but I used to go to a gym, and one of my gym buddies was like, he was like the guy that most people in the gym were intimidated. You just stay away from, He kind of looked mean a little bit. He was strong, like one of the strongest guys in there. And maybe if you went to the gym with Eduardo, Eduardo's that guy. It's intimidating. Half kidding. But this guy, for some reason, we just kind of became friends. And as I got to know him, like, this guy's just a guy. And probably some people thought that about me. Just, you have expressions on your face. Some people like me, like, I'll look mean if I'm just intense, but I'm not meaning to be mean. I'm just focused, and my face doesn't show how I really feel. And this guy was like that. Anyway, a couple of years that I knew this guy, working out, and I'm just working out on my own. He comes over to me, and he's like, hey, man, you ever see the show This Is Us? No, I've never heard of it. He's like, you'll thank me. Go home and watch episode 1 with your wife, and you'll be hooked. You'll thank me later. Weirdest conversation in the gym, all this testosterone, whatever. No joke. I go home. You can ask Laura. I go home. We watch the first episode in bed, healthy. Watch like, hey, this guy. I forgot about it. And we were hooked ever since. Anyway, we watched an episode last night. We're way behind. It's already ended and over, but we're like 2 seasons behind still. But we're watching, and I won't give you the whole story. But the bottom line, the reason why I even brought that up, is the mom in the story has like dementia, and she recognizes this. And one of the 3 twins is having a real hard time with this. And he is encouraged by his kind of half-crazy uncle that, dude, there's nothing that you can do. Really. And there's an accident. I won't get into the whole story, but the bottom line is he's encouraged. He's like, you just need to be there. He's struggling with just being genuine. He kind of lost his ways, and he was an actor in Hollywood and all this, and he kind of lived a phony life. But he knew his dad was just a great man, and he wanted to be like his dad, but he just always struggled to be like his dad. And I don't want to give it away for any of you who aren't to this point yet, but Kevin is starting to get it. And in yesterday's episode that we watched, it was like he realized, wow, getting it is just being there. I don't have, like, that was kind of it. And he sits in the hospital overnight. He doesn't even visit, and he's just there. He has nothing to say. He went and bought some gifts. to take in, and then the morning comes and he's able to go in and he just leaves the gifts. He has this whole transformation and he's just there. That's kind of like the Christian life. Now, there are some pastors and ministries that it's all whiz bang, man, everything's, a big thing, and we got to do this big event. And I've said this before, no diss on churches that do big, great events, but I was taught a long time ago, how you bring people into the church is usually how you have to keep them there. And so we want to bring you into this church through love and simple, authentic community, preaching of God's word, community. We bless the neighborhood. That's what we do. And not that we don't want to have some fun and do some other things as well. But brothers and sisters, I think the point of this farming illustration is that Christians are primarily sowing and cultivating in this life, not mainly reaping rewards. Because those are yet to come. And that's a problem because we want the rewards and we want them yesterday. We want the fruit of our labor to be shown. We want something, right? Commentator Davids, he adds this, quote, "The picture is that of the small farmer in Palestine. The small, carefully saved seed and for a harvest, living on short rations and suffering hunger during the last weeks. The whole livelihood, indeed the life itself of the family depends on a good harvest. The loss of the farm, semi-starvation, or death could result from one bad year. So the farmer waits for an expected future event. No one but he could know how precious the grain really is," unquote. What a great picture. It helps people like me and you who are not farmers recognize how difficult that was and is even today. We are to be like that farmer, patiently waiting until the Lord comes. Now, we all know, we probably would acknowledge and agree that patience is a virtue. Yeah, we can all agree. But wow, it is much easier said than done, isn't it? Being patient under temptations and trials can be very difficult, but thankfully God knows that, and He's given us some very practical instructions right here in James, verse 8. "You too, be patient and stand firm." Don't go with, stand firm. Stand. Almost the same verbiage as Paul in Ephesians 5. When he's talking about the armor of God, and he doesn't say, take charge, go get them. In Jesus' name, go. No. He says, stand firm. You're going to be under attack. Stand firm. And look at what James says. Be patient and stand firm. Why? Because the Lord's coming is near. I wonder how many churches encourage one another because the Lord is coming soon. I'm so convicted by that. We live so, not that we shouldn't be in the moment, we should be present in the moment, but we often live for the moment rather than in the moment and for eternity, if that makes sense. As Christians, followers of Jesus, it's crucial for us to live for the right things and keep a biblical perspective. And James and the Apostle Paul and Jesus and Peter and John, all of the writers of the New Testament, in fact, point us to the soon coming of Jesus to motivate the way we live. And let me give you a little bit of a theology of that in brief. The Apostle Paul was unjustly imprisoned. It's very in that. He was unjustly imprisoned and yet remained focused on the Lord's coming. Philippians 4 and 5. Rejoice in the Lord always. I mean, he's a prisoner. Rejoice. I will say it again. Rejoice. I wonder how much of that was to himself. Rejoice, Paul. Rejoice, all of you too. Let your gentleness be evident to all. He's not yelling with a megaphone. He's not calling people to march in the streets. He's definitely not an activist. He's definitely not calling for, I just lost the word. Protest is the word. If there was ever a point, I mean, it would have been definitely, you would think it would have been at the arrest of Jesus. That should have been a big protest, and of Paul. And yet it's the exact opposite. He says, let your gentleness be evident to all. Why? Because the Lord is near. I've always thought of this in two ways, and most commentators will take it one or the other or both. The Lord is near in that he is imminent, he is with us, he is present with us, but he's also coming soon. And I think it's appropriate. Both those things are true, right? And what did Paul have in mind? I think both of those things in tension. Jesus taught a lot about staying patient and living in light of his soon return. Here's just one example in Mark 13, picking up in verse 32. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son. Jesus himself, he set all of that aside when he came to earth. He couldn't have even told the disciples when he's coming back. He didn't know at that point. Does he know now? I think he knows now, but he didn't know then. Because he laid aside his glory to come, at least his manifest glory. But only the Father. Be on guard. Be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house. He puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and he tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back. Who is the owner of our house? Who is the owner of everything? We're just stewards. We're just stewarding what the Lord has given to us. Some people, I think Elliot and I were talking about this before, the song, the first song that we played, Brandon Lake, I think he's even won a Grammy, you know, and I was telling Elliot that his dad did the assessment for Laura and I. I wouldn't say that we're like close friends, but we interact. If I saw him, we'd chat for sure, he and his wife Cindy. And you know, some people, God just gives them a platform. And God has given Brandon Lake a massive platform as a worship leader. I hope that he'll just stay faithful and godly and humble, and it seems like he really is. What a blessing. Like, I couldn't handle that. But some people have that kind of stewardship. Some people smaller. Wherever you are in that spectrum. Some of you have, oversight of lots of people. You manage big things. Some of you manage small things, whatever. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you steward what God has given to you, and you do it well. Even in a small church, I look at just the diversity in here, and I know what most of you do, for a living, and it's just awesome to see such a blend. Back to what Jesus said. Whether in the evening or at midnight or when the rooster crows or at dawn, we don't know. When is he going to come back? If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. Similar to what Paul says in Ephesians 5. Wake up, O sleeper. Same kind of context here. He's not talking about death, as Paul often does use that metaphor there. He's not talking about that. But spiritually, what I say to you, I say to everyone, watch, be alert, be awake, notice what's going on. Don't be just asleep, loving the world like so many. Be patient, living each day as if he's coming today. Peter taught similarly. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6. In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. That's hard. That's pain. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes, even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. In other words, none of your pain or grief or suffering will ever be wasted. I can't tell you why XYZ is happening. He's not saying, he's not saying there's a cause and effect type of thing. He's saying that God will use the suffering that we go through for his glory. And we may not know any other reason why. But we know that he's going to use it for his glory ultimately. The Apostle John also pointed us to reflect on the near coming of Jesus. 1 John 3, 2, and 3, one of my favorite of all the passages that we could go to on this topic. Dear friends, now that we are children of God, Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But what we know, so there's a lot of things, even John, who wrote the book of Revelation that Brother Bruce is going to help us, navigate through a little bit. It's complicated. There's a lot of stuff we just don't know. We'll wrestle with it, but a lot of stuff we don't know. But here's what we know, that we know. That when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And notice verse 3, and all who have this hope in him purify themselves just as he is pure. So when I'm living today in light of his coming, when I'm waiting, when I'm even anxious, Lord, is today the day? I want to make sure that every responsibility today is done well, is done in such a way to where if you come in the middle of me doing this, that it will put a smile on your face and that I'll have a smile on my face. Because if I'm not going to be smiling when he comes. It'll be bowing in shame. I don't know how long that'll last. He'll lift it back up. But all the things that we did not for his glory, it's just gone. It burns, as the Apostle Paul says. It's going to be burned up like fire. It's just gone. And all those things that we did for his glory will last, and there'll be reward for all those things. Wow. David's adds, again, quote, the finish line is just ahead. The important point is not to give up now and lose all that for which one has already suffered, unquote. God doesn't waste our suffering, and let's not allow it to be wasted in our lives either. And when we're just, again, it's hard for me to address. The darkest, most painful things in my life pale in comparison to what so many, even of you, have gone through that I know. It's hard for me to my pain and my suffering in light, but I don't want it to be wasted. I want, if nothing more, what's the difference between your house where Christ reigns, hopefully, and your next door neighbor where Christ does not reign? I don't know if you've thought much about it. I mean, those of you who've been with us for a while have probably heard me say this a number of times. There's only one real, main, tangible difference. You know the presence of God in your life even when there's drought. But when it's drought on your neighbor's house, they don't. There's no promise. There's nothing they can lean on. There's no hope other than just hopeful, wishful thinking. But in my house, we know the Lord, and then we know that the Lord is with us. It rains here. It rains here. If you're, in the midst of a hurricane, all of us neighbors, we all get wiped out. The Lord doesn't just preserve Christians, When the stock market crashes, it's not like, all the Christians are, no. Like we all go through trials. We all go through pain. We all experience death. What's the difference? What do we have that they don't have? We just know the presence of God. That's why just being present with people who aren't Christians through their suffering is so key, because that's the presence of God with them that they wouldn't know any other way. James added some basic instructions, last verse of the passage here, verse 9. This is, I warned you. Don't grumble against one another. I don't know what sound that makes, but it's, everybody make your grumbling noise. Okay, well, now we got that out of the way. Don't grumble against one another, brothers or sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. It's easy to blame others, isn't it? Man, we are living in an age where I think this generation just seems to be raised to blame everybody else. Whatever problem you or I are facing can be easily someone else's fault. We're living in a time in which significant percentage of people take no responsibility for their circumstances whatsoever. All their problems are someone else's fault. It's like blaming everything on the devil and taking no responsibility for our own shortcomings and sin. That's the age-old contrast between wisdom and foolishness. The wise person understands that even if the other person is 99% at fault, there's probably a percent that's mine. So I should have some humility even if I'm right. The difference can be subtle. Listen to this quote from Burdick. Quote, what is forbidden is not the loud and bitter denunciation of others, but the expressed feeling of bitterness or the smothered resentment that may express itself in a ugh, or in a psh. Husbands and wives, right? Wife says the right thing, but I'm not in the right mood, and what is it? It's a psh. Sometimes it's verbal, sometimes it's not. Maybe it's our kids, right? Those of us who have teenage kids, right? Teens in the room, right? Dad says something. What do we usually say? The first response when Dad says something, psh. So here's what God has to say about that. Don't do it. To live with resentment and judge one another, even if it's our kids or our spouse or our parents, is to ignore the fact that Jesus can return imminently even in that moment, which is clearly what the writers of Scripture believed, as I've unpacked. Last quote from Dr. Moo. I love that. I quote Dr. Moo in my devotion often. I love his commentaries. I was introduced to him about 23 years ago, and when I first heard his name, I almost fell on the ground. I think I did fall on the ground. My RA, when I was in Bible college, was introducing me to this commentary by Dr. Moo. I was like, are you serious? I fell over laughing. But he's great. Dr. Moo says this, quote, the early Christians' conviction that the parousia, the coming of the Lord, was near or imminent meant that they fully believed that it could transpire within a very short period of time, not that it had to. So if they believed it, that was 2,000 years ago. Subsequent generation, I mean, how many young people are like, okay, coming quickly, 2,000 years, yeah, right, buy that Bible stuff. How do we explain that? Well, we can't ultimately really explain it, but we can in the sense that time to God is not time to us. In fact, we know that God made a promise 750 years clearly, where the promise sounded like it was going to be fulfilled. I'm going to send, a virgin is going to be conceived by the Spirit. That was 700 plus years before it actually happened. They would have expected it to happen soon. And then there's some other prophets that kind of regurgitated all that. And then 400 years of silence. So God's not in a hurry, but He's always on time. And when He showed up in Bethlehem, right on time, those who were looking, they understood and they got it. And for 2,000 years now, there are many that don't get it. But those who do, as John says, they purify themselves because they have this expectation that the Lord is coming. James described Jesus as the judge standing at the door of heaven, ready to welcome Christians into His heavenly throne room. The hope of His imminent, any moment return should strongly motivate us to live patiently and sacrificially. So let's close by reflecting on these words of James again. Elliot's going to come. We're going to sing a couple songs. I know the first one wasn't enough for some of you, and we're going to heat it up, warm it up in here. We're going to sing and respond. But I want you to listen to a little bit different trend like this, and then we'll close with prayer and sing in response. Here's what James is saying to us this morning. Dear brothers and sisters, be patient as you wait for the Lord's return. Consider the farmers who patiently wait for the rains in the fall and in the spring. They eagerly look for the valuable harvest to ripen. You too must be patient. Take courage, for the coming of the Lord is near. Don't grumble about each other, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. For look, the judge is standing at the door. Let's be patient today, standing firm, knowing that the Lord's return truly is near, not grumbling or holding grudges against one another. That's so petty. Jesus, our true judge, is standing at the door, waiting for us. Dear God, thank you for your word that has instructed us this morning. Help us not only to be hearers of your word, but to be doers, to put it into practice. Jesus said that those who not only hear, but also do, will have a strong foundation so that when the winds and waves and storms of life come, they will stand strong. And that's what we need today, oh God. We need a strong foundation in our lives. Help us to grow more deeply in patience, not to let so many unimportant things become too important, not to be sidetracked or distracted with pettiness, not to live for so many temporary things, but to keep the soon coming of Jesus in mind every day. Help us to prioritize the things that truly matter, primarily your word and loving people well. Give us ears to hear now what you are saying and courage to respond. In Jesus' name, amen.